gentlemen, welcome to a very special episode of Prize Fighters, Circus Freaks, and Gangsters. I'm Greta.
And I'm Jamie.
And we are here to look at the formation of modern Christmas by looking back at its origins in the 19th century.
Yes, Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays and all those platitudes that occur this time of year.
So here we are looking at Dickens and his Christmas Carol, which I have come to sort of see that while Christmas may not be eternal, I kind of think A Christmas Carol is, or at least Scrooge.
Well, I think that given the fact that this is what started Christmas, I mean, this really kicked off Christmas in the West. It was like really a German thing prior to Dickens grabbing a hold of the German Christmas and being like, ooh, I love saying Fröhliche Weihnachten, but I want to say it in English. And so he just turned O Tannenbaum into O Christmas Tree and wrote a ghost story, and they were off to the races.
I think there's also the Protestants had a big hand in creating modern Christmas, because it used to be Christmas was just another feast. Like, 365 days of the year, and before the Protestants and everybody got involved with, like, screw you, the Catholics, like, out of 365 days, like, 200 of them were feast days. And so every feast day couldn't be that special because nobody could pull that off. It was like you'd have your name day and whatever. And then the Protestants are like, no more feast days. Feast days are indulgent and bad and terrible and no more parties.
Yes.
Okay, fine. I guess the birth of Jesus, we can have a tiny party, a teeny party.
Wait, so the church was the one behind no more feast days?
The Protestants, yeah. All of the anti-Catholic churches, yeah.
That's fascinating, because feast days really were, well, I mean, traditionally in the medieval period, that's when the average person got all their protein.
Right.
So it really, like, I mean, that took a significant portion of their diet away doing that, didn't it?
Well, it's kind of funny because, like, you had the feast days and you had the fast days, and at first it was, like, around the 16th century, they really got into, like, the fasting part, but then they realized their workforce, if you made the peasants fast on fast days, like, they couldn't work. So they're like, okay.
Yeah, because they're already fasting.
Right.
300 days a year, they're fasting.
Right. And so they're like, okay, no, red-blooded meat. And so that's why Fish Fridays, especially on the East Coast, are such a big deal. Because they're like, as long as it's not hot-blooded meat, it's okay.
I thought that was all due to a papal bull that was trying to get the fishermen of Italy to get paid.
I'm sure that was part of it, but there is a lot of, like, you can't have your poor people not allowed to eat a whole bunch of the days of the year. Like, that's not going to go. And then also the rich people are like, wine.
Yeah, well, and also they're not making money off the poor people when the poor people aren't spending what little money they have for overpriced food.
Sure. There are a lot of reasons that they sort of like, we have to have fast days, and they're like, well, okay, it's not such a good idea, so we'll start jiggering it. But, I mean, the Protestants did have a point. The Catholic Church was up to a bunch of nefarious no-goodedness.
Oh, yes. Now in the modern era, I've always wondered, like, what the hell was everybody's beef with the Catholics? Maybe burning people alive. That might have been a... It's especially pacifists. They just went into France and they were like, are you a pacifist? Burn him. That was just like how they worked in France.
It's something else. But like every reform operation, it starts off with a decent idea, and then the extremists, because they have the simplest phraseology, take hold, and they're like, let's go burn shit and break things. And so you get, like, the Calvinists and stuff. It's like, nobody's having no fun nowhere at no time.
Yes, and then we had the Puritans pick that up, and they banned Christmas altogether. So the whole stop taking Christ out of Christmas thing, it was illegal in New England to celebrate Christmas because they thought it was a satanic holiday.
Oh, yeah, well, those version of Christmas would like sort of sprinkle in, those Lutherans. Yeah. But yeah, no, it's really the Protestants who sort of helped Christmas become this big deal. Whatever traditions from whatever locality picked up from whatever cool pagans who were still doing fun shit, that's that. But by getting rid of all of the feast days, all you're left with is just like little tiny Christmas.
Yeah, the one feast day. And it was so nice. Yeah. It was so nice of Charles Dickens to be like, ooh, this one feast day is so amazing. I'm going to take it from the working class who deserve, and actually, I'd like to point out that slaves in colonial America would get 4 days off for Christmas. And now, no person who's not rich gets to celebrate Christmas on Christmas because we all have to work. We don't get the day off. We don't get paid for the day off. We don't get the day off before or after. It's just a day to resent rich people, really. It's a whole month of resenting rich people. I know I've spent the last 7 days hating every rich person on the planet. God damn, did I enjoy watching that billionaire die in a fiery car accident on Thanksgiving. Whew. That
painful.
It warmed my heart. God, Christmas season makes me evil.
Christmas, it has changed a whole bunch. The whole Christmas season is not eternal, but this story of Scrooge, I think, really, is. The 3 visitations, the changing your life, I mean, like how it all went down, and for this, it's different, but that style of storytelling has been with us forever.
Yeah, and also, I think it's important to note that this is a ghost story, and It was popular to write ghost stories at Christmas because Christmas used to be the spooky time of the year. Now it's been pushed to Halloween, but Christmas was the time you gathered around and told ghost stories because it's the shortest time of the year. I mean, you have no sunlight, you're just gathered around a fire, you don't have shit else to do, tell each other scary stories.
Yeah, it's dark and it's cold, and yeah, it's sort of like the last. Though the feasting has always kind of been there. It's like, everybody still has, some stuff left to eat. So let's get together and share and celebrate and, pass out for a few days because being awake just isn't really worth it right now.
Well, and we know that they were also tripping balls during this period because, at least in America, they were eating of the mince pie, which had been banned by the Puritans, but they brought it back because Americans are so hardy that they need to trip on Christmas. And so shall we delve into, because I believe that this was part of why ghost stories were being told at this time, is because everybody was tripping on LSD that they got out of their meat pies.
Okay, so when you're saying LSD, you don't mean the refined stuff. You actually just mean the
Not
poison
the refined stuff
that was being produced by rotting rye grains, yeah?
Yes, ergot poisoning.
Yes. Yeah, and so, that could kill you, but if it didn't kill you, it could just, give you hallucinations for sure.
And real bad stomach aches, apparently, because all of the literature of this period was either people couldn't poop or they were pooping too much, and especially related to the mince pie stuff. Like, it was just like, I love it so much, but it makes me so sick. But I'm so tough, I will take it because it makes me feel so good.
Well, I mean, having internal discomforts was most of the literature of the period around food anyway, because you always have mild food poisoning. You have really unbalanced eating. If you were really rich or really poor, you were, only eating bread or only eating meat or, people weren't getting a lot of vegetables, and especially if you were a soldier and didn't have women around to tell you to eat your vegetables.
Oh, like those guys with the carnivore diet now, Jordan Peterson's little fans. My God, they need a woman. They need one woman amidst that sea of incels to just be like, guys, just eat some broccoli. Come on now.
Well, but he's got his daughter on the all meat diet. Like, that was the impetus for all of that, because she had all these health problems.
Ooh. Yeah, I have found this myself, and anybody who's ever known a woman who's tried keto dieting, it does not react well with female hormones at all.
It depends on depends how it goes about. There's a whole bunch of women influencers out there pushing the keto diet.
I mean, well, at least in my experience, a very strict,
Right.
hardcore, like for my style of 30 grams of carbs a day makes their hair fall out and their period goes crazy. It's not good. It's not.
Oh, well.
But anyway.
But that's not what we came here to talk about.
It isn't. We're talking about Charles Dickens' reverse
Yes.
Robin Hooding Christmas. Taking it from the poor and giving it to the rich.
Sort of my idea that, the Christmas Carol is the Christmas Carol and it doesn't matter. All the stories are the same. Jamie decided to completely take up that challenge and said we should.
I did.
Yes. You're like, I'm going to watch a different one than you. And so which version of the Christmas Carol did you choose?
I went to the greatest counterpoint to your adorable original point. I went to Scrooged from 1988, the Bill Murray vehicle, and it is something. The best part of it, I would have to say, is the inclusion of Bobcat Goldthwait, the guy who makes all the weird voice, who talks weird from Police Academy.
Yeah,
not the guy who makes the weird voices.
Not the sound guy. Yeah,
not the sound guy, but the weird voice guy.
Yeah. And because I was like, oh God, that's the scary version. Yes, I went with the most adorable sort of all the hard edges sanded off version, and I went with the Muppets. So we'll see if my proposition holds. How eternal is this story? Can it hold together regardless of the vehicle?
Well, the Muppets can make any movie amazing. You put Waldorf and Stadler and Beaker into anything, and it's automatically amazing. So you win this regardless of whether or not Scrooge was an amazing film, which I will contend not the best representation of this film or of this book.
But, on the other hand, I think, does it get the message across? And that'll be the question.
It will.
So in both cases, we start off with a picture of the city, whichever city we're in. Mine's in pretend Muppet Land and yours is in
New York City.
Oh, yeah. And it is like cocaine fueled, dark, sweaty, nasty, rat infested Trump inhabiting.
This is basically like if you were to have
80s
a Christmas Carol inside of the Gotham in the 1988 Batman. Like, it is that same shit. It's dark as hell, and you can almost smell how bad New York City smelled in the 80s. My God, you could smell New York City before you got there in the 80s. It smelled so bad. And
is it the age of the garbage barges?
Boy, it was really bringing it all back. And Bill Murray really did channel the soulless cokehead. What I can tell you is I hated every single second that I was in New York City every time my mom dragged me there.
And in both cases, we have our misanthrope in chief trying to keep himself warm with his riches and anger.
Yes. And so my guy is not your guy. It is Frank Cross in Scrooge. And I guess because nobody's going to name their kid Ebenezer in 1988 or, 1945 or whatever. So Ebenezer's just too old a name. So, they went with a very white name, Frank Cross. And everybody said his name like, Frank! You had to deliver Frank like that in the 80s, I guess. So, like you were yelling it. So, and he is the head of IBC Television rather than... What does Ebenezer Scrooge do in A Christmas Carol?
So in The Christmas Carol, he is a money lender. He's sort of like banks worked really differently. And so he was kind of a loan shark, kind of a property manager. And if you weren't a sort of rich enough or noble enough person to have a bank account, because working with banks, like not every single person could go to a bank. Like now you can just be a person on the street, and if you have some sort of valid ID, you can open a bank account. That's not how the world works.
Well, there's a problem because there was no ID really back then, was there? I mean, people had to know you. You had to bring the mayor in to be like, yes, this is Jacob Marley from, you know what I mean?
Right. So if you had the right parents or cousins or whatever, they would write you letters to vouch for you. This is how you got to be a con man. You forged these vouching letters. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But if you were just some successful, I don't know, leather goods merchant or butcher or, somebody who had done really well in their profession and now you had some money, if you're like, holy cow, I'm good at my job and now I'm making money. I would like to go open a bank account. The bank would be like, who are you?
Yeah. It was, and that continued into the 1960s. You had these small money lenders because there was no real system of credit that had been established.
And so the same thing, if, again, you had been somewhat successful in your profession or you had a good steady job, you're like, I would like to purchase a home or I would like to rent a house. And so you had to go to one of these brokers who owned houses. Like you couldn't just go like rent a house because you had money. Again, you had to know somebody. And if you weren't good enough, you couldn't rent a house except in like these super crap parts of town. And
or white enough.
Well, yeah.
Or male enough.
I'm sorry. Are you a female person who wants to live under a roof? Well, gotta get a man first.
Yeah. Go get a man to, go prostitute yourself so we can judge you about it. But then we'll talk. Because you got to bring a man in here.
So, yeah. So really Scrooge was the type of person sort of filling a gap in the economic system. And, the world was changing at this point. It used to be if you were a poor, not a noble and not a rich person, wherever you were born, that's more or less where you died. But England was changing at the time. And so they were kicking people off their farms. And so you had all of these people who like suddenly didn't have a house. And so they're all moving to the city.
And it was a rough time for that to be happening too. When you're hearing all times or all these songs about how White Christmas and things like that, it's because Charles Dickens lived in the end of the Little Ice Age, and so the Thames actually froze over to the point where they were able to walk an elephant over that.
Oh yeah. Which
I think there must be a bunch of dead elephants at the bottom of the Thames now, because that there had to have been times that did not work out.
Oh, yeah. The Frost Fair started getting going right around Queen Elizabeth's time, and that's also the time England stopped being able to produce wine grapes.
Because of the
Little Ice Ages, yeah.
All right. And so it was tough to grow crops even when you were a farmer. There was less food.
Right.
The food was more expensive. It was a bad time. But still there was provisions for the poor. Poorhouses would specifically on Christmas have like big feast layouts so that people could come and eat. Another thing that we don't have in modern America, they just tell you to go fuck yourself and work harder.
Well, there's some versions of it and, pluses and minuses, and bringing up the poorhouses is good because that's really the life experience that Charles Dickens had that, affected him. Like, unlike a lot of people that we talk about who, grew up comfortable or grew up with money, like he actually lived in a poorhouse for part of his childhood.
His family lived in a debtor's jail, and as a child, he was sent to go labor to earn money to buy his dad and his rest of his family out of jail.
Yes.
He was like 6 when he did this, which is fucking crazy.
I think it was closer to 9, like, because one of the things...
9, okay.
Yeah, geez, Jamie, don't be so dramatic.
I prepped for this a month and a half ago, or whenever it was before we took our break, all right? So give me a break. I listened to like 8 hours of podcasts going into when I thought we were going to record, and then we had that snafu.
And yeah, whatever, and we had... we just had to take a break from each other. Jeez. No. But
yes.
He talks about how he lost.
Let's be real. You were sick of me.
But he lost his books. Yeah. So he really was sort of mad at the way the poor were treated in England, and with good reason.
Yeah. They really were not treated well. But again, they still got lots of time off for certain holidays, which... Again, I'd like to point out as a significant benefit over the modern American experience.
Unless you were a house servant.
Oh, yeah, because you would be serving on the holidays.
Right. And
would that then be the purpose of Boxing Day? It's kind of like the day that the servants get to celebrate Christmas?
Yes, and that's why all these Boxing Day meals would be like all of this cold food, and so it could just be prepared before, and so all the servants would have to do is like put it out on the buffet, and you're like, make your own damn sandwich for a change.
Well, that's nice. They got a day for that.
Yeah.
There was a similar thing for slaves. They could take their master hostage, and they had to buy they would buy their freedom, back from the slave who had, captured them. And certain slaves were able to actually buy their way out of slavery with this Christmas money.
Huh. I mean, that what you're talking about is sort of harkening back to sort of the Elizabethan and sort of medieval Lord of Misrule, where
yep, exactly. Yep.
Where you'd sort of take everybody's positions, who is in charge and who is powerful and who was a servant and who was below, and it would get flipped on its head. And so like a lot of the goofy stuff that they would do would be like wear, shoes on their head or wear their clothes inside out, that kind of stuff too, to just like emphasize the backwardsness and the oppositeness of what was going on that day.
Yeah. Yeah. It's too bad that it wasn't like a, you know what, today's so crazy, we'll even let the ladies buy property. Just for one day only. Ladies, you're a real human. Go buy some property.
Well, it would probably be for just that day only, and then they'd have to give it back. So, anyway, we have our misogynist in chief in both cases. In The Muppet Christmas Carol, of course, he's just, I'm not giving any money to nobody to make them more comfortable.
You're not going to mention the epic actor who plays Ebenezer Scrooge in this film. Come on now.
Michael Caine.
Yes.
And the best thing about it, the best conceit of all of the Muppet movies is that whatever, marquee actor they put in, they manage to get this person to play it straight. They play straight. Doesn't matter that they're playing it across Muppets. It's like they're just like they were on the stage, and it is fantastic.
You can tell how much actors love acting with the Muppets in every Muppets movie. Like the Muppets Haunted Mansion, where Taraji B. Henson is like trying to seduce I think Kermit or something like that, and she could tell she was like so into it and so happy to be there. And Michael Caine was doing the same thing. He was just like being the Scrooge. He was loving it, and I loved watching it.
Oh yeah,
I actually watched the Muppets Christmas after Scrooge because I was like, this movie's a pile of shit and it makes me hate Bill Murray even more, so let me watch something else. And Waldorf and Statler saved the day.
They cheered you right up. They do have a good musical number. But yeah, because Frank Cross goes hard. He doesn't just hate people; he wants them to suffer.
Yeah. So where Ebenezer Scrooge is just like, holidays is a bunch of humbug, or you should just be working all the time. Frank Cross is really more like you're my assistant, you're my slave, you do what I want, and he's just ordering people. The way Bill Murray is in real life, just constantly ordering people around, filled with cocaine, no emotion, hates everyone. Even down to when he's talking to his assistant about like who he's giving certain presents to. It's just between a bath towel and a VCR, and the way that he selects it seems to be so arbitrary, and he's just browbeating the shit out of his assistant. And it was a very different dynamic, I thought, than Ebenezer. Yeah,
though, and as a TV producer, he has come up with like the most intricate, everybody has to work on Christmas Day, live Christmas special, but somehow the advertisement for it includes like assault rifles and blowing up reindeer or something.
Well, I will say that this, there was a movie in a commercial in this film that was like like Santa with assault rifles and stuff like that. And that has inspired several movies, one of which is coming out this Christmas. Yeah, one came out 2 years ago called Fat Man, and I forget what the new one's called. I don't remember what it is, but it has sleigh in it instead of SLEIGH. It's SLAY, I believe.
Yeah,
no, it is, like the epic Santa sleigh.
Yeah, it is interesting to think about sort of this sort of like very sarcastic and somewhat angry and rather coked up, like, hey, we'll make these pretend movies where Santa's mean and kills people, and then here we are in 2023, and people are like, yeah, I bet that would sell.
Well, I mean, this was the same year that Die Hard came out, which is the official movie of Christmas. And I think everybody was kind of caught up in that, like, RoboCop thing. That's really what it felt like to me. Like, it really was like that RoboCop parody satire thing where they're just amping up like how Americans are just so obsessed with sex and violence, and so they just turned like this holiday special about the story of Christmas into like guns and America and biceps, and it really did speak to
and not realizing
I mean, and we were just doing that right up until now, pretty much.
Yeah, and not realizing that no matter how broad and obvious your satire is, people are going to take it seriously.
Yeah. Well, I mean, really, at the end of the day, you can only watch Christmas Story so many times, right? You got to mix it up somehow.
Somehow. But yes, we have angry men all the way around. Nobody's going to celebrate Christmas and squishy way.
Nobody wants to tell him it's a terrible fucking commercial, except for his Bobcat Goldthwait, his little assistant. And he's like, but this is horrible, and it's supposed to be for Christmas and children, and like, you can't let children see explosions and nuclear explosions on Christmas. And he gets fired for it.
Yep.
The day before Christmas.
Yep. Just thrown it on the curb with his box. And you're like, oh, that's a little familiar. I know some CEOs who would do that now.
Yeah. Well, I did get fired like the 2 days after New Year's. They made it 2 days after New Year's, so I've had that experience before. I was laid off like that. It was brutal.
Though I will say, back then, if you got fired right before Christmas, you wouldn't get your Christmas bonus. Now it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
There's
Christmas
no such
bonus.
thing.
Yeah. I mean, at least then you'd get the day off for Christmas. That would be cool.
What a quaint tradition. Yeah, no.
Work harder.
Anyway, so after a terrible day at work, being cranky at everyone, it's time to go home to their luxurious, solitary splendor homes.
Yes.
And in Scrooge's case, it's really funny that by being such a misanthrope, by being such a human hater, this sort of screws him over in as far as like how much comfort he can possibly have. And if you can't be bothered to actually like hire servants, you are cold and miserable and kind of hungry.
Oh yeah, because you don't even have anybody to God, you got to start a fire. You have to start a fire to cook.
Right.
So that's like, I don't even know how long it takes to start a fire to cook with, but it's got to be at least a half hour, just that. And then you got to get a kettle or whatever
to get the coals, boil it. And yeah.
I mean, it's a nightmare from start to end. And the fact that he's doing it all himself because he's too cheap to pay somebody to do it is just crazy.
Yeah, so he ends up eating just like some bread and cheese and beer. But this is also jokes on him. If he were a little less of a misanthrope, he could go out to a pub, right? He could like go hang out with other people. But that is the last thing this man wants to do.
No, he wants to stew in his misery. Yes.
But Frank, he has electricity and stuff, but he's not that much happier.
No, and I love the parallel between the house of Frank Cross and the Yuppie's house in National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. How everything is all austere lines and it's all gentrification colors. It's black, white, gray.
Yeah.
And which is funny that even in the late 80s, the gentrification colors were still black, white, and gray. But right. Just suck all the color out of everything. But so his house is just totally austere. There's nothing in it. And he's just like a stereotype of a yuppie in the 1980s. What are yuppies called now? Yuckies? Is that what they're called?
I don't know. We're so busy naming everyone. I've lost track of what we call them. But I will say that, at this point, we get both of them they head home to their equally miserable, lonely homes, equally miserably. And, well, let's see. In my case, Scrooge just is cold and bored because, there's no TV to turn on, so he just goes to bed.
Yeah, which, I mean, you can't even read by firelight. You'd go blind immediately. I mean, I've read by firelight, camping and things like that. It's not easy to do.
No, that's why people would have, like, lanterns or an entire candelabra or something like that. And you had to be rich to read at night. That's what it came down to.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, but he won't even pay a servant to set that up. So he's just... And plus, when it's that cold in your own house, you don't even want to get up. You're just like, all right, I've got this cocoon of warmth. I'm not going to move, and I'll be fine.
Right.
I'll just have a cold nose.
So, yeah, he goes to bed. So, I forget. Does Frank just go straight to bed, or does he go do some mayhem?
Yeah. No. He just goes straight to bed. He has a completely empty house. It's, one of those houses where there's nothing on the walls, and, yeah.
Right.
It looks like he does not even live in his home.
Ah, yes. Sort of, he's got finance bro-itis. I've got this, but I have no joy in anything that I've acquired. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess all of his joy is reserved for cocaine. Yeah.
And then I get a musical number with Statler and Waldorf.
Yes, you do.
Talking about how everything in your life has been making other people miserable, and so you are about to reap those rewards.
Yes, and I get no fun at all. It's just it's his old boss, Jacob Marley, and he just is like, oh yeah, you're gonna be a miserable, because Frank Cross has this impression.
Well, you get zombie makeup, right?
No, I'm not gonna drag. The one thing about this that is dead on to Dickens is Dickens wrote a gross ghost story. Like, the ghosts in it were gross. And so I do have to say that the little bit of grossness, it is exactly on par with the movie House that came out, I believe, in the same year. I'm really digging into the crates here because these are old-ass movies. Mm-hmm. But it's not really gross gore. It's kind of campy gore, but at the same time, like... It does look gnarly. So later on, when you see death and things like that, like, there's some gnarly stuff in this movie that was pretty fun. And the director of this film is Richard Donner, who did the first two Superman movies. And, yeah, and you can see a lot of that in it as well. Like, just the way it's shot. And you almost expect a Christopher Reeve to walk in at some point. Oh, but anyway, so his boss, he has this impression that his boss is like that he really loved being this, like, go-getter on all that. And his boss is like, I was a miserable prick, and you are going to be a miserable, lonely prick if you keep doing this too.
Right.
And also these ghosts are coming.
Yes. And, and this is a thing in storytelling forever, right? That, you have the hero of the story facing trials. I mean, that's just storytelling 101. And the trials in this case are, past, present, and future Christmas.
Yeah, and this trope comes from an ancient, or not, well, I guess it's ancient by our standards, but it's a medieval story, I believe, that birthed the ghosts that come and, like, tell you about yourself. And that's really what it was. These ghosts are just coming to tell you about yourself. They're telling you your past, they're telling you your present, they're telling you your future, but they're going to give you the hard truth whether you want it or not. And and the hero sort of visiting somebody who tells them something cryptic and having to go through trials. I mean, like, this is just storytelling, but the fact that there is sort of this medieval precedent for it, I think that's really cool. Yeah, and I think it does kind of nicely encapsulate and kind of condense your mental machinations that you go through when you're kind of taking stock of your life midway through and going, well, what the hell have I been doing with my life? This is a mess. And then you look back and you're like, oh, well, I have this shit I have to deal with, but I got this shit now I got to deal with, and where am I going in the future? So I feel like it really does kind of condense the hero's journey transition down into one, like, week of ghostly visitations.
Right. So the classic... past of Scrooge, poor little guy sent to boarding school. And the more I learn about British boarding schools, English boarding schools, that's why the British Empire was so evil for so long. Like, they trained these children to just beat down every little piece of humanistic feeling and just see the world as victims because they were so entirely victimized while they were in school.
And never given a hug.
No!
I mean,
that would make you soft.
We've seen in psychology what happens with kids that you don't hug. They turn crazy. And this was generations of kids who were not hugged their entire childhood. Never told I love you. And it created maniacs.
Yeah. Just the more I learn about it, I mean, the word fag as we use it in the modern American sense comes from the British boarding school system.
Really?
Yes. Okay. So in British boarding schools, there was the system of fagging. And where the word fag originally came from was a bunch of sticks, faggots. It was like this valueless piece of baggage you could carry around, which is, why cigarettes in British English speaking countries are sometimes called, give me a fag. Can I, have one?
I've always wondered what the fuck is a bundle of sticks anyway? Who's walking around with a bundle of sticks?
Oh, you'd pick it up out of the forest to bring home to start your fire.
Oh, okay. So it's just kindling. Like an armful of kindling is called a faggot?
Yes. Like that's how old the term is. Yeah. And
boy, it feels real uncomfortable to say.
I know. And somebody's going to take an audio clip of me saying this and my life is going to be ruined for doing etymology, but here we go. But so the system in the boarding schools, like you would have some guy who would be the head boy or the top boy. Like if you sort of want to know how the system works, it's all of the stuff that's going on in Harry Potter. She's just taking out all of the physical and emotional abuse. So, most of it.
And added in slaves.
Yeah. Instead, they transfer it to the house elves. You're 100% right.
Christ.
And so basically, the way the house elves are treated in the Harry Potter books, that's how the younger boys were treated by the older boys.
Good God.
And so they would give them all these insane, impossible tasks, like shine everybody's shoes. And then, like, every week or something, the head boy would, like, list off all the infractions. And they would get to physically discipline them.
Okay.
So, like, the juniors and seniors would be, like, physically beating 8-year-old boys. So
this is the quote-unquote hazing?
Yes.
All right, so this explains something that I've keep seeing come up in the histories of workout people, and there were a couple of people that Teddy Roosevelt took a big stance against hazing because there were a couple of really good football players who had their entire careers destroyed because they had their backs broken or something like that in hazing rituals. And I was like, how the fuck do you get your back broken by somebody making you shave your head? But I guess it's a bit more like I chased him off the top of a roof trying to rape him to death and kind of thing rather than a... Good Lord.
Oh, yeah. There was also definitely sexual violence as well against these little boys. And it was always the thing, like the boys who could kind of take it, those were the ones who were considered tough or, worthy. And so you ended up with a bunch of psychopaths.
Jesus.
Running things because they were the ones who could separate themselves from all these experiences.
Or you had the guys like me who just fought their entire football team until they'd stop trying to haze them, and you create a psychopath of a different type.
Yeah, and so this is the thing. Like Teddy Roosevelt as a kid was a pretty little guy, and so you're like, yeah, but what didn't he come from like a rich, privileged family? It's like everybody he was in school with was from a rich, privileged family, so that didn't matter. But he was like a little dude, and so he caught a lot of the hazing when he was younger. So that's another part of the reason that he was against it, because he was never top dog. He was at the bottom of the pile.
Surprising, all these guys who have these really tough guy biographies like Nietzsche and Teddy Roosevelt and all of the list is legion, but they're all sickly, small people who got beat up a lot. Funny how that works.
Well, I mean, that Bernard
McFadden.
Yes, he was a little sickly dude too.
He was still a skinny dude, but he was beating people up when he was older.
Right.
But yeah, he was a little guy. But yeah, there were a lot of... It really seems like all the... Max Stirner, the philosopher, he was also another one who was real like, I'll fight everybody. And it's like, no, you won't. Like, you are busy you're writing this from the inside of a closet. So those guys were very like, and it was all angry teenager writing back in the 19th century.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Angry teenager writing. It is a genre that either gets ignored to its detriment or elevated to its detriment. And I'm like, no, it just needs to be placed in context. It's a stage we all go through, and don't give it more importance than it deserves.
Kurt Cobain was not the greatest thinker of our generation. He was just an angry teenager who spoke to a lot of angry teenagers.
Yeah, he he's very good at it, but geez. So how does Frank
Dickens was the Cobain of his generation, right?
Yes, yeah, he was, but the drugs weren't as potent. So how does Frank experience his younger days? Why is he mad and upset and damaged?
Well, he knows that his family does not like him, and he also comes to the realization that he's missed out on the great love of his life.
Well, and that's true for our Scrooge as well. And I seem to remember with Frank, his family situation is emotionally screwed up as well. And so he escapes it by doing TV, yeah?
Yes, yeah. His dad was very abusive, but he's got this really loving younger brother who's like trying to kind of take him back into the wow. I'm seeing a lot of parallels in my own life, not with an abusive father, but like with the family trying to drag you back in during Christmas. I guess that's a lot of it. And so I guess maybe this movie was a bit more kind of touching on things, and maybe I just didn't like it because it hit me too close to home. But yeah, so his brother's trying to bring him in and kind of make him a part of the family, but at the same time, Frank Cross is reminded of his like poverty and like the poverty that he came up in and that sort of thing by seeing him.
Yeah, so all of the things he wants to leave behind, both the things that he disdains now. God, I was poor. That's disgusting. And then all the emotional stuff he just doesn't want to deal with. And, and that cuts across both stories. Scrooge is like, hey, you had a really nice girlfriend who like wanted to do stuff and be around people. And you're like, nah, I need money. I don't need affection.
Yeah, and I think that is also another thing, especially in the 80s. I mean, it's happening now in Japan as well, where people were really trying to downplay the romantic part of anybody's life. And really, like, that isn't important. It's just about work.
Oof. That's painful. That's going to be a problem with AI as well, because it's like, well, if I just look at the media properties and like the writing that's out there, all the complex emotional stuff, we have not written well about it. And so the AI is going to learn all of the wrong lessons.
Hopefully they feed a bunch of AI a lot of romance novels, so they at least learn how to resolve problems without stabbing everybody, and they'll think that billionaires are the only people who ever get laid, but...
Oh my goodness. So then, yes, we get to Christmas now, and in the classic Scrooge story, that's definitely a double-edged sword. There's all of the life and happiness, and people are actually worth being around in the classic Christmas story. And so how does it go down for Frank?
There's not so much of that, because in Christmas Present, in the Christmas Carol, you get the Tiny Tim, right, where doesn't he say something?
Yeah, you sort of start out that like, hey, there is a lot of good here. There is a lot of joy here. People don't totally suck. Are you sure you don't want to hang out and have fun with people?
Yeah, and whereas in this one, so his ghost is this like really gross New York City cabbie who's driving and he's kind of like a Beetlejuice type ghost, and he's real crass, and he's like he's telling all these jokes the entire time, and there's none of the like humanity's something you want to be around, because he just shows him like his family is like celebrating Christmas, his brother's celebrating Christmas without him, and everybody at the party is making fun of Frank, but his brother's trying to defend him, and then he also sees this homeless guy on the street dying of exposure, or not not on the street, but I think he's in the sewer or something like that. But it was this guy who, when he was in Christmas Past, and he was trying to go, talk to the girlfriend, the love of his life that he had abandoned. He was really callous to these homeless people who were like just being alive, and so after being callous and crass to these unhoused people, he sees one of them frozen to death. So
and so that's the other half of Christmas Present in the classic version. It's like, yes, there is all of this joy and fellowship and like, you know, joking around and people don't suck, but it's like you also have to remember that there's a lot of suffering and you are part of the system that has created this suffering. And in the classic version and in the book, there's the showing of ignorance and want. And it's always very interesting to me which versions of the Christmas Carol include Christmas Present showing ignorance and want and which ones skip right over that.
Okay, so does the Muppets... do the Muppets go into it, or what do we have?
So the Muppets do leave out ignorance and want. And when it is included, there is sort of this warning, like that joy and Christmas and your friends and everything is important, but also remember that there are these underlying problems that you do need to be aware of. And, you know, when they're not included, it's like, no, it's Christmas. It's supposed to be fun. And, you know, as annoyed as you are with Dickens, the fact that he wrote that into his story, even in the midst of all of this, you need to remember there are problems that need solving.
Yeah, there is that, and it was a tradition at that time for the rich to like contribute heavily to Christmas at poorhouses and things like that. And I guess this was kind of a reminder to them, like, you have a duty and an obligation to the people who are underneath you to help them celebrate this holiday. And that is something that was entirely left out of this film, of Scrooged. Not only is this dickhead making every person in his company work on Christmas, but like even when they're showing the Ghost of Christmas Present, all they're doing is showing that they're showing his assistant. His assistant's name is Grace. The person he fires at the beginning is like his name is Elliot, I think, and he's just like some low-level executive. But his assistant, Grace, is a woman of color, which I found to be also distasteful because it othered the shit out of the poor. Like, it made them like, oh, the poor people are also a different color. But she has a son who won't speak.
Yeah. And don't they also make her a single mother,
She's a single mother and has a selectively mute son who stopped talking after witnessing his dad's death. And I just, like, there was none of it in there except, like, oh, well, maybe I should pay these people more. But he doesn't even say that. It really was distasteful, I found, this portion of the film. Among many.
You know, and so at this point, and in the classic one, there's the, oh, hey, you know, you thought, you know, Tiny Tim was so cute and wonderful, and hey, wow, look, the Cratchits are so resourceful, and despite it all, they make joy out of this. And the Ghost of Christmas Present, in sort of his most coherent moment, is like, you know, you have the power to flip this fate one way or another. Keep on doing what you're doing, and this one human that you've kind of made a connection with, Tiny Tim, he dead. Or you could change your ways and save Tiny Tim. Yeah,
and they did make the point in that film too, because I remember Michael Caine walking up to the window and being like, well, what are they doing? And he said, oh, well, they're laying out Christmas dinner, and he's like, but it's such a meager feast, and they're like, yeah, but they're happy to have it. And he really drove home, like, these people are managing to be happy even though they don't have shit.
Right.
And you're a miserable dick even though you're rich. So maybe you're fucking up and you need to kind of reverse the script a little bit. And it also pointed out any little bit that you give these people will be appreciated.
Right. And this is always the funny thing that I think even in movies that don't realize that they're doing this, they sort of show these people getting, you know, piles of money in nefarious ways. And there's no joy in it. Like, they might go like, well, now I have all this money, so I guess I have to go spend it on stuff. And it's like, you know, getting all of this stuff doesn't make them happy. And like, it happens in all of the versions of the Christmas Carol, but you look at every other movie or just real life stories. Like, you think about the Enron guys. Like, yeah, they were running around in speedboats and whatever, but these were not happy people. They all get divorced and their children hate them. And why am I talking about Elon Musk now?
Well, I mean, in the 1980s, or when this movie was made, the gap between the wealth gap was significantly worse than it was in the 1840s when Dickens wrote the Christmas Carol, and it was even then in 1880 the wealth gap had gotten pretty crazy at that time, and around the time that Dickens died, and so that was thought to be the worst wealth inequality in America, but we've blown that out of the fucking water. Like, it got bad again in the 1980s, and then it's now 25% worse than it was in the 1980s. So the wealth gap has gone crazy, and in spite of these films, like Scrooge came out in the 1980s, Brewster's Millions tried to make the point that money doesn't make you happy, and even spending it'll make you fucking miserable, which is a nonsensical. I mean, that's a nonsense movie, but cocaine's a hell of a drug, I guess. None of this shit seems to have sunk home, or they made it worse, one or the other.
Yeah, and they might have made it worse because it's sort of like, but you know. I'll show you, I'll get a gajillion dollars and I'll figure out a way to be happy. But it is very funny that the 1980s wealth gap was precipitated by sort of really the beginning of the effective squashing of union labor. And in the subsequent period of time since then, the wealth gap has increased. Your ability to just kind of live a decent life for the wages you earn in a week of actual labor has just slid, and what you can provide yourself and your family has just crumbled in that time. And guess where we are? We're back to the 1880s, where the labor movements kind of have a simple point to make.
Yeah. Well, at least our labor movements are speaking up in certain industries, I guess. But I would like to point out that this is what happens when you elect actors into office. And we should never, ever do it again. And I love The Rock, but let's keep him the fuck out of the office. Because
he has no interest.
Reagan destroyed America, and Trump just pissed on its ashes.
Yes.
So
yeah, no, The Rock is smart enough. He's like, nah, I would do a terrible job, and I like to have a relatively unexamined life as an actor, compared to what your life becomes if you become a modern politician.
Good Lord. That is wild out there. It's wild.
So then we enter the creepy silence of the ghost of Christmas future. And, you know, this is a conceit that you see in, you know, just about every myth and story where you have a figure that's sort of working as a portal between the present and the future. That it's cryptic and or silent, and the main character is sort of creating their beliefs about the future.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't picked that up in any of this, honestly.
Again, my kiddo is way into story construction through his own interest in video games, so we talk about this kind of stuff a lot these days.
Oh, sweet. Yeah, well, that makes sense. I mean, because it's a Grim Reaper in Scrooged, and then when Frank pulls open his shirt, the Grim Reaper has this like Quatu thing from Total Recall come out of his chest,
right?
And which was really gross, and that was my favorite part of the entire movie. So if you happen to just want to catch this, just Google elevator scene in Scrooged, and you'll probably be able to see it. But that was a fun bit of practical effects, and but I guess you're contemplating your own mortality, hence the Grim Reaper, and then you're projecting the future. All right, I'm with you. It makes sense.
Yeah, because if anytime you sort of look back at like old mythology and you have somebody talking to an oracle, or they manage to travel to the underworld or some sort of like separated realm where they sort of have a portal to the future, whoever's sort of mediating this access doesn't tell them shit. Or if they do tell them something, it's very, it's super open to interpretation, and there's nothing sound and solid about it. And so the person who's getting the information just like, they manipulate it into either their worst hopes or fears. And because these are miserable, miserable men, they're their worst fears.
That's amazing. And to that end, a disgruntled Elliot, a single white man between the ages of 30 and 50, shows up at work with a gun.
Oh my God. When I watched this, I was like, oh shit, we were doing this all the time in the 80s and 90s movies. It would be somebody coming into a workplace, shooting up the place. I'm like, one, this hasn't aged well. And two, I guess people really do what they see on TV.
Well, I think, didn't it start in post offices in the 1980s? I think people started shooting up their work. Because that's where the idea of going postal comes from.
Yeah.
They were people in sorting centers who worked for the post office, and they were never allowed to go to the bathroom, and they had to do some crazy rate of sorting, and they just would go fucking nuts and start shooting the place up.
I mean, when you actually sort of look back at what actually happened, the original events that the phrase going postal came from were actually not that deadly and not that extreme, but it's sort of one of those things, the more you retell it, like you read the actual facts of it, and it's like, it's interesting, but it's not that exciting. But then you go and you hang out with your friends at a bar, and it gets a little bit, exaggerated and a little bit exaggerated. And so we sort of, the picture we ended up holding in our minds in the 90s of kind of what this was, it was far more extreme than it ever was in real life.
Yeah, and I mean, that happens, even if you look at the Rambo movies, like it starts out with like this guy with PTSD who just wants to be left alone while he's hiking, and he has to fight to defend himself. And then by the end, this man has in the newest Rambo, he has PTSD tunnels that he's dug underneath his ranch in Texas, and he goes about slaughtering cartel members like Jason Voorhees. It is insane.
Whoa, there's like a fourth Rambo movie?
No, this is the sixth, I believe. Sixth. It's called Rambo Last Blood, and it is a literal slasher movie. The end of it is fucking crazy. He has this huge ranch in Texas, and he's dug PTSD tunnels like he's in the Viet Cong, and strung lights and shit through it, and dug punji steak pits and all kinds of shit in it. So when he gets attacked by the cartel, because now he's killing him because they kidnapped his niece, they hunt him down to his ranch, and then he traps them in these tunnels and starts slaughtering them like a slasher film while he's playing The Doors at like an insane volume in the background. It's quite a white man's revenge fantasy come to life.
Oh my God. So it is like Indiana Jones. Like, they're the first three movies that I was aware of, and then I have no idea about anything that happened after that.
Yeah, but they just keep amping it up each time. Well, the death toll was 100 in the first one, so 200 in the second one, and 600 in the third one, and 100,000 in the fifth one. You know what I mean?
Well, and it sounds like from your description of it, they just got like a bingo card or a dartboard of like every movie that's made money in the past 2 decades, and like put out all of the plot points, and they're like throwing darts at it, and they're like, okay, we need a girl kidnapped, we need music from Vietnam,
It's like guys' grocery games where they're trying to decide how to do the meal except for murder. Actually, it all comes out of a rivalry between Arnold and Sylvester Stallone. So they just kept outdoing each other, and that's why they kept doing these sequels with more bodies and being more buff, and like... And so they did the same thing with, like, this story, for instance, in Christmas Carol.
Oh, my God.
It just kept getting amped up each time.
Oh, jeez. That is crazy. Okay, so...
And Muppets Christmas Carol came out almost at the exact same time as Scrooge, right? Like a year after, maybe?
Oh, God. I don't know what year it came out. Okay, I have to Google this real quick.
Because I believe this was at the same time Michael Caine was in The Equalizer, which... was on TV at the time. He was a TV... I knew him from TV. I didn't even know he was, like, a serious actor from Britain.
Okay, 1992 was the Muppets Christmas Carol.
So it was 4 years after Scrooged.
So but you're right. Yeah, basically 1, 2, and there you go. Yeah, so we went either more hardcore or more cutesy wootsy. So yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So we got the Hallmark Channel and Fat Man happening at the same time in 2023.
Yeah, the rise of kawaii and the rise of like the ultra slasher flick. Yeah.
Exactly.
Everybody retreats to their corners.
What is kawaii?
Like the Japanese idea of like super cutesy wootsy.
Oh, so like when girls talk like this?
Yes. Right. Yeah, it's sort of an outgrowth of the whole Hello Kitty verse.
I thought it was an obsession with Lolita that must have driven that.
Well, there is the whole problem with you have a very sexually segregated society, and so teenage boys and young men aren't around actual human girls and women, and it becomes very sort of like convoluted and flipped up in itself. Yeah.
So they just eat off of naked women, but they don't talk to them in regular life?
No, I mean a lot of Japanese upper grade
crazy.
Schools are single sex. Yeah.
Ooh. Well, and they wonder why their society is asexual. That's a brain buster.
Yeah, so you think about sort of like the 80s and 90s and the early 2000s was very much about sort of women being integrated into the working world and sort of opening up jobs in the military and even like professional sports to women and sort of like, hey, they're actual entire human people. Like that was several decades that the Japanese were not participating in.
That's interesting. And I just realized this film does not pass that test. The
Bechdel test?
Yeah, it does not pass at all. What is it called again?
It's the Bechdel test.
The Bechdel test.
For people who aren't familiar with it, is do you have women in a piece of media that speak about something other than either the main character, who's always a dude, or just about men in general?
Rambo Last Blood actually passes that test, I think. It passes it better than this fucking movie does. There's hardly any women in this movie. It's really just his ex-girlfriend who is just... Her only purpose in this film is to moon at him, and he's a piece of shit, so it doesn't make any sense. And that's it. Oh, no, I think there's a couple of women who get to talk a little bit at the Christmas party. Yeah, oh, yes. But she only gets to talk to him about work.
Yeah, and Frank's wife, who only talks to her husband about Frank's brother's wife, and she only talks to Frank's brother about Frank.
Yeah, there's literally no reason for a woman to watch and films were so segregated back in the 80s. I mean, really up until today, they've been really segregated.
Well, I mean, there would definitely have like women in films, but yes, there were girl roles and boy roles and,
and girl films and guy films. There really wasn't, that's why you and I both love Grosse Pointe Blank so much.
Right.
It was finally time where we could have a crossover film everybody could enjoy that wasn't for kids.
Right. And the fact that, I grew up watching a lot of boy films because there just weren't that many girl films out there. And the nerve of them, the Black Stallion horse film starring a boy. Go to hell.
Oh, was it there? That's amazing. I've never seen Black Beauty or any of those movies, but because I don't like horse films. Yeah. But I can't even believe they put a man into one of those movies.
Oh yeah. The whole shtick there is this like beautiful Arabian horse. Oh my God, we are so far off topic. Gets shipwrecked somewhere and is saved by a boy, and I'm like, it's a horse film. This should have a girl hero, but it's like, no, if we're gonna have a main protagonist who does anything physical, it's got to be a boy, because we
gotta have there's a man writing this check, so there's gotta be a man taking that check. Yep. I guess.
Yep.
So speaking of men doing man stuff, yeah, so in the Ghost of Christmas Future, we do get to see Claire, the love interest, for a second. She marries a rich man. She's unhappy. Frank dies. Nobody goes to his funeral. Nobody's surprised at that except for Frank. And then he kind of snaps back and he's like, "Oh, I love everybody. Let's go make Christmas good." Yes,
and which is pretty much the way the classic Christmas Carol happens. He he has his funeral. I do sort of love the moment in the original Christmas Carol where they talk about putting a stake of holly through his heart, and you're like, that harkens back to like the rise of this vampire novel. Like that was a reference to staking vampires.
I did not know that.
Yeah. Because remember, the vampire story was like, it was in development, so Dickens is putting a little pop culture reference into his story.
Oh, so like so it's referencing Lord Byron's The Vampire then.
Or other sort of popular media that was sort of playing around with the idea. There was a bunch of ephemera and like little novellas and sarcastic poems and whatever. Yeah.
Well, I think that The Vampire was a play by this time, right? That was a play by this time, because Byron wrote it in 1815 or something like that.
Yeah, so you sort of think, like, there was the equivalent of TikTok videos people would do, just like short run plays that you would go see, or, you know, people would make up little plays at their school, or, you know, and then they'd all write their friends about it and it would disseminate that way. And so, like, the idea of the vampire was kind of out there.
Gotcha.
Even before the Bram Stoker book.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So it is pretty funny that he manages to get like that little pop culture reference into, like, as you said, this is a gory ghost story. So he's going to throw in like the latest like cool creepy crawly detail.
I really do love the fact that these Christmas stories, like Irving Washington stories, were all ghost stories around Christmas too.
Oh, Washington Irving. Yeah.
He has two last names, so I always confuse him.
Right, it's like Steve, Bob, these people you run into, yeah.
And for anybody who doesn't know who he is, he's the guy who wrote The Headless Horseman, right?
Yes, the Ichabod Crane story, yeah, and that took place in Sleepy Hollow. And so there's a bunch of Headless Horseman stuff. There was the show Sleepy Hollow on TV for a while. But he also just sort of wrote about Americana, but Washington Irving is also well known for introducing the Spanish Romanticism into the American consciousness, because he has a book called Tales of the Alhambra. You know, when he was a bored romantic, he went over to Spain and like camped out there when it was just a wreck, because Napoleon's army had gone through there and just like completely trashed it.
I didn't even know Napoleon conquered Spain.
Jamie.
Oh, I learned something new every day, I guess. I really, French history is a big blind spot for me. I knew that he controlled the continent, but I didn't know there was a war there. Who the fuck wants to fight in Spain?
Lots of good wine.
It's like fighting a war in Arizona. Like, what are you doing? Nobody wants that. Let's move on with our lives.
Don't you remember all of the silver that was brought over from South America? There is treasure buried in all of these castles all over Spain. Oh my God.
I genuinely thought they only fought in Mexico.
Why do you think they gave a shit about Mexico if they didn't care about Spain?
I thought it was like a Vietnam thing. Give me a break. I thought it was a Vietnam thing. Why would the U.S. and the USSR fight in Vietnam? It doesn't make any sense, but that's what happened. That's what I thought Mexico was.
Yeah. No, oh my God. No, I mean, because the whole thing is like the War of 1812, the only reason the War of 1812 kind of went the way it went is because the British were all tangled up with the French and the Spanish and Napoleon and blah, 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 blah.
No, it's because it's because of America. It's because we fought so hard. The English couldn't handle us.
Well, that, and it still took 3 months to go between Boston and London.
Well, we didn't fight that hard. And
no, we did not. We were a mess.
No. I'm of the opinion that you and I could get maybe 40 people together, and we could have taken out Andrew Jackson and his crew of weirdos pretty easily. We could have conquered New Orleans, made it a decent place.
I don't know. I didn't want to go up against Jean Lafitte and his dudes, because they were hard men.
Well, I don't want to go up against 19th century medicine. So let's table that idea.
But successful 19th century pirates, I'm like, I'll be over there. Because they will. There are a bunch of joker 19th century pirates, but there are also very successful ones, and yikes.
Yeah, I just don't. I don't want the Ghost of Christmas Future to show me a bone saw ever. Never once. I don't think I've done anything to deserve a bone saw ever in my life. Or in the case of your pirates, a mallet and a bone saw.
You know, we saw.
We don't have anything to get you drunk with, so we're just gonna hit you over the head with this mallet.
Oh my God, that's right. I've forgotten about that. They do it.
We're not letting you into the rum store, sir. You're getting this mallet to the temple.
Oh my goodness. But yes, just like in Scrooged, you know, the classic Michael Caine, Ebenezer Scrooge, you know, wakes up and, I'm going to be a good guy. I'm going to feed everyone. And, this is its own modern lesson right there. You can do good things for a moment. You can give some stuff away, but living a good life with connections to people contains a lot of stupid little jobs and putting up with small irritations. If you want to continue that, that's work.
Yeah. Was that the message in your film? Because mine had a much different message.
Oh, I mean, in the classic one, it was he saw all these terrible things. He learned that he could change, be the change he wanted to see in the world. And so everything ended up great. And because it's a children's movie, everybody lived happily ever after.
Yay! In mine,
alas, is not.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, we could at least. I like the idea that everybody lives happily ever after, and people do in mine.
Me
although, well, I'll just get to it. So, Elliot, the guy with the shotgun who had been fired, is now allegedly rehired by a person because Frank Cross is being fired because he's been going through this different stages of a nervous breakdown through the entire film, and they've actually brought in his replacement to take over his job. So this guy's just being a schmooze and sliding into his job. And Bill Murray has this crazy nervous breakdown, which was lifted almost directly out of the film, the 1976 film Network, which started actually a current affair in all the bunk journalism, TMZ type journalism. He lifted the guy's meltdown in that film out of that and put it into this, and it saved Christmas somehow. And then everybody sings "Put a Little Love in Your Heart," and I walked away screaming, "Fuck Bill Murray, fuck this movie, fuck Charles Dickens, fuck Christmas." I had some notes. Put a little love in your heart. Oh my God. Yeah. The love of his life sees his nervous breakdown on TV and goes to the TV station instead of to a justice of the peace or whoever changes your name so that she can now go into some kind of WITSEC so that this maniac can't hunt her down and find her. Good God.
Yeah. Okay. So this is very interesting now that, wow. Okay. So it does hold up. You can watch any version of it and you get the plot points, but they all come out with a different message at the end. I mean, mine is do good, be good, and you'll make things better. And in Scrooged, it sort of more sounds like have a nervous breakdown. The woman of your life will come and try to fix you. That's an 80s message.
Yeah, the woman that you chose 30 years ago will now drop everything to come fix you. That's definitely the message of, yep. Or she'll scam you and pretend to be your husband until you're just locked into a relationship with this person who has now kidnapped you, as in the film Overboard.
Oh,
which was around the same time.
Woof.
Yeah. That was a kidnapping film, I just realized.
Yeah, it pretty much, kind of was. I mean, I found it funny because at last a dude got gaslit, but,
Well, there is that.
I'm not sure that makes things better because, just to be honest, that is what passed for a female revenge flick in the day. You trick a guy into taking care of you.
The 80s. You made it. We made it.
And
God.
And it is very funny now that people are like, yeah, things used to be better when everybody knew their place and you didn't have people expressing themselves. I'm like, people expressing themselves is messy, but unless you were on the very top of the pile, things kind of sucked a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And now that we're digging so deep into the history. I mean, we've got our hands deep in the guts of history, and the French Connection, seeing that, and then digging deep into the 18th century, 19th century stuff, you're seeing how gross history is, really, I guess. I mean, we're really just kind of looking at the entrails of history and trying to predict the future, like we're divination specialists. But when you do it,
oh my God, that is such a great image.
It might be my greatest analogy.
It's so real.
We're doing divination by going through the guts of history, but I guess it does show that we have advanced in certain ways, and it's just one of those things where we're kind of struggling for everything to catch up to each other. Is that what you're seeing, maybe? Like a bungee cord effect?
Yeah. No, we're definitely going through another major societal upheaval. And as happens every time this happens, there's all the people who are like, why are you breaking this thing that I know? And I'm very mad about it. But sort of looking back at, 19th century Christmas, which in a way was trying to recapture a Christmas feeling of the past because society had gotten completely exploded. And so again, we are sort of heading towards this urban computerized society in the 80s. They had no idea what they were in for. But, again, the societal upheaval.
We could see a real serious change in our holiday season during our lifetime.
Yes.
Now that I think of it, because the Christmas was really created by the explosion of mass media.
Yes.
Without the printed word. And so Dickens was this guy who was trying to make a living off Christmas, because really the first hit he had was A Christmas Carol. Mm-hmm. And so every year he tried to put out another Christmas book so that he could make money. And when he wrote A Christmas Carol, he wanted it to be distributed to the working class, but the motherfucker printed it too expensively. He printed it hardcover and color because he wanted it to look nice, and
like
so only
gold
rich people got
edges and leather bindings and all this shit. Yeah.
So only rich people could fucking buy the thing. Maybe because the internet is more or less free, we'll see more of a popularization of it for every class. Do you think that's possible?
I think we're going to have to sort of let go or reformulate a lot of like what winter holidays are, because it was, the Christmas of the 19th century was like everybody's a Christian. Everybody lives close to their family because it was very much a family-centric holiday. You would get back together with your family. Well, now, from even just the 1980s until now, families have just flown apart. Like, almost nobody works near where they grew up, right?
Yeah, and I mean, even when I could even when I did get off for the holidays, I spent all of my fucking money that I could have spent on a vacation or anything else going back to my parents' house for Christmas, which I didn't want to fucking do, right. But that was my vacation every year, was that. And
that was the tradition. Yeah. That's what you had to do. And in some ways, yes, family togetherness and sort of establishing these bonds and everything, but it's changed so much. And the fact that my family on both sides and all the sides is spread all over the place, and the only people you were surrounded by were your family, and now everybody's family is everywhere. And so getting back together with your family every single year or several times a year, like, it's kind of insane now.
Yeah. Well, especially in America. I talk to my British friends all the time, and they talk about, it's really far away. So I only go like every 2 weeks, and I'm like, oh yeah, how far away is it? 45 minutes drive. And I'm like, my wife drives an hour and a half to work.
Right.
An hour and a half.
Right.
I think it's stupid as shit, but she does it. And so it's just crazy.
Yeah. And you you think about, like, if you did leave your family to emigrate to the U.S., the assumption was you would never see them again. Like, that was that. You might get a couple of letters from them. But now we have an expectation.
Well, that and, I mean, a person could die of anything at any time. You could get a hangnail and be dead
but even
tomorrow,
if they did both survive,
you got to see them when you can.
How are you ever going to travel? Like, unless you're incredibly stupid wealthy, you did not travel just to visit people.
Oh, really? You didn't just like hop on a horse and go see Fran in the next county?
No. All your friends.
Well, you couldn't, obviously. You would not be allowed to travel by yourself. That's crazy talk. I meant me. I couldn't just get on a horse and...
No, but yeah, even people who, like, say, went to school together, like, dudes might go to, a college together or whatever, and then they wouldn't see each other for 10 years.
Yeah, well, I guess society has changed profoundly in a lot of ways. And now we have the ability to just talk to people over Skype, so you don't really need to waste all your PTO trying to go to your mom's house for 3 days or whatever. But,
I just sort of think about, the 16th or the 17th century, and I'm like, no, I can just go over here to the shiny box and press some buttons, and I can talk to somebody anywhere in the world, and like, you're a witch.
Yeah, no shit. Just the fact that we have mirrors all over our house, they'd be like, witches! Witches! Oh, and for one last fun little thing, speaking of mirrors, something that I learned that I thought was really fun, that was very popular in the 19th century, is that when people did travel, say for instance you were going to travel to the pyramids, what you would do is travel with your best handheld mirror.
Huh?
And then you would look at yourself in the mirror. You would take a selfie by looking at yourself in the mirror by the pyramids or whatever. Oh. And there was almost like a sense that the mirror itself captured the image, and it became like something you would take places to travel and look at yourself in this mirror. How wild is that?
Oh my God. There was a theory for a hot minute there that you could figure out who killed somebody, that if you could like they thought your brain and eyes sort of worked like a camera. And so if you could somehow extract the photograph that people took right before they were killed, and that's how you could solve a murder.
Oh, shit. And then we got Minority Report. Once Philip K. Dick learned about that and took a bunch of acid.
Oh, my goodness. Well, so I think, yes, the Scrooge story is eternal, but Christmas is in for a bunch of changes. And the 19th century really did sort of form the idea of Christmas that we are desperately trying to hold on to our detriment, our complete detriment.
Oh, wait, full circle.
Yes.
P.T. Barnum.
Yes.
What was he the king of?
Humbugs.
Yes. And there we have it. Ebenezer Scrooge's favorite word and P.T. Barnum's favorite word, all together. Humbug was a big thing back then, which just meant bullshit, right?
Yes, yeah. I sort of love it that it was like a very polite way of calling bullshit on people.
Merry Christmas. Bullshit.
There you go.
Good morning, sir. What's good about this morning?
Oh, my goodness. I think that is the perfect note to walk away from this whatever the hell fiasco it was, but incredibly enjoyable and weird.
We're back, baby. We're back.
Okay, well, if for some reason the people listening to this want to continue to follow us, where can they find you on the internets?
I am at Plague of Strength on Instagram. I post every day, and I have been blowing up, honestly. I have one of my posts has 8,000 likes or something like that now.
Congratulations.
It's kicking it off. It's going up and up and up. So I am posting awesome stuff every day. You can get your nostalgia on, because I have to admit I've been pandering, doing a little 90s nostalgia, because I know people are loving it. So 80s and 90s nostalgia is where I've been recently. If you're tired of the 19th century, you want to go 1990s, then hit Instagram.
Alas, I am still stuck back in the early 19th century, and I am just sort of working my way through how you do war and adventure in a very young America, and what people were eating and how it happened. So
how you do war and that's literally all they did. It was war and adventure. They were just like, let's start a war. We haven't been that way. You want to go that way?
That's exactly it.
I don't know what. I can't wait to discuss with you at some point the mentality of explorers, because it doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, you sort of think about how bad life was where they were. Why not leave? Why not go look somewhere else?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I guess when your choice is like, oh, you're cutting my rations to 9 weevils a day. All right, fuck it, I'm out.
Yeah.
I will swim off this boat.
To sort of hold back to some warrior there, when Wang Chao says to Jacob, I don't want to go to China in a coffin. He's like, you can stay here in a coffin. So like, for a lot of people, it's like, well, I'm gonna die quickly anyway, so I might as well do it on my own terms. Maybe I'll see something cool.
Boy, the 19th century could have used a Yelp for those guys too, because how many stories have I read in the last year of people being like, let's make that badass dude the leader of this expedition, having no idea that badass dude has no idea what he's doing, can't read, can't write, and he's the one you've got in charge of doing the math for the provisions. It never worked out. It never worked out once.
Oh my God. We are going to have to track down some media that deals with some of the financial shenanigans of the 19th century, because hot damn, there is some juicy,
there was chicanery.
Stuff there.
Chicanery was afoot.
Yeah.
All right, is that it?
Yes, that's it. We will see you next time.
Chicanery is afoot. Goodbye.
All right, bye-bye. You can find more of Jamie and how he can make you stronger at plagueofstrength.com. You can learn more about old American food on my other podcast, The History of American Food. We're on Instagram at PCG Podcast, and you can always reach out to us by email at pcgpodcasters@gmail.com. And you can find more dope beats like this one from royalraven.com.